please give him your full attention.
Good morning. For those of you that don't know me, I am David Zaluski, and today I want to take you on a journey, a very personal journey. I'm going to let you in on a story of pain and triumph, of heartache and survival, of the indomitable spirit of one person, my wife, Elisheva Miriam Zaluski. I want to start by having you look at these numbers. Does anyone know what those numbers are? Blood pressures, okay? So, you don't have to answer this out loud, but how many people do these blood pressures belong to? Just think for a moment. How many people do those blood pressures belong to? 5? If you said 5, raise your hand. Okay? Most of you. Because there are 5 different blood pressures, right? Anybody say 1? Okay? 1 person. How can that be that there could be 5 different blood pressures but belong to just 1 person? And the reason is, if a person is what you'll hear me refer to over and over today, is a multiple, has what is called, used to be called MPD, multiple personality disorder. Now, 15 years ago, it changed in the DSM there, diagnostic manual for mental illnesses, to dissociative identity disorder. Now, I want to say right up front, I hate the word disorder. Okay? A disorder implies something wrong. Well, something did go wrong with anyone who becomes a multiple. But it is not organic. It is not a disease that you are born with. It is not like schizophrenia or borderline personality, any of those. MPD, or DID, is a coping mechanism. It is an incredible mechanism that the mind can create to survive. And that is key to understanding a multiple. It is when a person endures such trauma, such pain, such suffering at an early age, okay, before all of your emotions get more understood, where we can identify fear or love or hatred or anger. When you're a young child, that's all mixed up. And at that age, when they endure very great trauma, the mind, some people's minds, can split to form different people. In this case, this blood pressure belonged to Amy. Amy was 3. This blood pressure belonged to Ginny. Ginny was 6 or 7. She was actually 6, but she didn't like to say she was 6 because she hated that number. So she always said she was 7. Ginny was deaf. My wife was raised by adoptive parents who let her be taken by a group, a cult, anytime they wanted to abuse her. And the cult would take my wife and put headphones on her and crank up eardrum breaking sounds for hours. Ginny was created because she became deaf. I had to learn sign language with a bunch of my friends. We went to North Central Technical Institute along with Ginny to be able to communicate. This here was Twilight. Twilight was around 14. Twilight was a throwback to the 60s. A hippie, played guitar, wrote poems, dressed like a hippie. This here was my wife. Now we're getting up into some higher blood pressures. If any of us go to the doctor right here and have that blood pressure, they're going to want to put us on medication. And the more anger in a person and the more pain in a person, usually the higher that blood pressure is. And this one here belongs to several. Isis, Deborah, Joanna. They took some of the worst of the abuse. They had tremendous anger, tremendous pain, and always a high blood pressure. Now, just so you understand how this works, when we go to the doctor, and any person who's a multiple goes to doctors so much, because they have suffered so much in their life where their body has been put through so much trauma that it results in a lot of medical problems. Well, if we go and say my wife was out, her blood pressure would be somewhere in that vicinity. If Isis or Deborah were out, the blood pressure would be that high. Doctors won't leave you with that kind of blood pressure usually without putting you on medication. But how do you treat someone whose blood pressure varies this much? And if we go in there and Isis, say, was out, halfway through, Amy would pop out, take over the body, and then they take her blood pressure, it would instantaneously change. And we did this. We have our own blood pressure machine at the house, and we played around with some of this just to understand what a multiple was. And I could call out any one of these people, and that blood pressure would instantly change, determined upon what they went through and their age. The lower your age, and if you have any younger siblings, you can test this at home if you have one, the lower the blood pressure. Let me illustrate, if I can, that might help you understand a little more of what it takes to be a multiple. Let's just pretend that this table here is yourself, okay? Your body, your mind. But this part right here, this bucket, is your capacity to endure pain. And all of us have a threshold of how much pain we can endure. If you add more pain, say, than you can endure, and we might just spill over onto the thing a little bit. What happens? Okay? What happens to that person? Well, if you can't find a way to deal with all that pain, you may go crazy, you may die, you may go comatose, there's all kinds of things. But let's say the mind can figure out some way to extract some of that pain for a while. Create someone else that can take that pain. Let's take Amy, the 3-year-old there, and let's give her a little bit of the pain. And then let's take Joanna, way down there, high blood pressure, and take some of that pain. She took a lot of the rape in the cult. And let's take Jimmy, the only guy that I knew of in my wife's what I call system, and take some of that pain out. And suddenly you see the bucket goes down. Deborah, take some more right there. And there's more capacity to endure, right? More an ability then to continue to live. Now, the stuff's still here, right? All this pain is just waiting someday to be revealed. It still exists, but while growing up, it puts it in, think of a capsule, in a container, that someday later they can deal with that pain. Otherwise, it's just too much. And so the mind splits. The greater the trauma, usually in a person, the more alters it takes, right? If I just started hitting you, but then someone slid over and said, here, I'll take some of it, I start hitting them, but then they hit their end point, and then you say, well, here, I'll take some of it. You're sharing that. Does that make sense? My wife's abuse was extremely extreme. It was planned, it was calculated, it was frequent, and it was severe. It was the winter of 2009, January to be exact. The temperature outside was about 20 below. I was sound asleep, and the phone rings at 4 a.m. in the morning. I run to the phone, it was a landline, I pick it up, and I hear this voice, "Church guy, help me!" I knew instantaneously it was Amy. I'm confused as I could be. And I'm like, Amy, you know, what's up? And she says, "Church guy, help me, they're fighting." I go, "Amy, just hold on." And she's yelling in the phone, and I drop the phone, and I run out to the garage, trying to figure out what's going on, and the van was gone. I instantly know what had happened. For the last couple months, my wife's demeanor, her attitude, her actions, all was changing. There was like some pressure inside, some other force or person changing my wife. And that often happened when there was an altar that had memories that needed to process those memories to heal, that in my wife, the host, the birth person, you would see a change in so much about her. So I come back to the phone, and Amy's just in a panic, and I go, what happened? She says, this new altar, okay, this new person came out and took the van and was headed south to try to find her adoptive parents, to try to get answers. And they, somehow, the people inside of Alicia, and you've got to think of it as a world within a world, okay, like a hotel, when she drew this out for me, and they each have their own room, and they have living quarters, and they came out, and they started fighting for the body and wanted to get this person, Isis, out of control of the body. So they shoved 3-year-old Amy into the driving wheel while the van is going down the road. Now remember, Amy may be 3, but Amy's been 3 for 40-some years. So it's not a typical 3-year-old in that way. She was brilliant on top of it and could do a lot of things, but she still was 3, and her fear was 3. And she said, you gotta help me. And I'm thinking, damn, it's 20 below 0. By the time, wherever she is, I get there, it's gonna get cold. And I go, Amy, where are you? She goes, I don't know. And I said, Amy, look around, what do you see? And she looks around, she goes, white. Typical 3-year-old. Snow. And I go, Amy, you gotta look around more. Turn around in the car. And I said, you see anything? She says, I see a sign. I said, what does it say? And she goes, and she sounds out everything phonetically. And she goes, no, not house. And I think, not house, what's there? Nutshell down by Flax. And I knew that her adoptive parents lived down, 40, 50 miles down that way. And I'm thinking, okay, I gotta get there, but I gotta get there before this new altar takes over control of the body again, or who knows where they're gonna go. And it's cold, so I go, Amy, here's what I want you to do. I want you to roll down the window. I want you to turn off the van, and I explain how to start it by the remote on the keys. And I said then, and she go, I did it, church guy. And I said, no, I want you to whip those keys out into the snow. And so she did that. And I said, now hang tight. And so I call up the neighbor girl, Lady Chris, who was just here for the last class, and she was like Amy's adoptive mom. I said, Chris, get ready. I'm running over there. Alicia was gone. And so I run over to the neighbors. By the time I get there, she's all ready to go. We hop in her car. I'm driving, heading down Highway S at 90 plus, 100 miles an hour, okay, in the middle of the night, to try to get there to save my wife and these others from this ISIS. By the time we get to Flax, we pull up to the van. It's sitting there in a snowbank, and I could tell it's not Amy, because the person behind the wheel was sitting there with their fists just tight, grabbing that steering wheel. And I walk up. I didn't know this person at this time, and I go, hi. And this person looks at me with daggers in her eyes and goes, fuck you. And that was my first words with ISIS. An altar who would literally turn the family's world, my children and my world, upside down once again. You see, ISIS was trained in the cult to do mission type things, deliver drugs to different people. But ISIS was also a free spirit. She was more comfortable with my son, who was 17 at that time, with his friends who lived at our house, than she was with me and my friends who were all in our 50s. Together, she and any friend who would stay up would play Guitar Hero all night long. I'd go to bed, I'd get up at 7, 8 in the morning, and she would still be playing Guitar Hero with whatever perhaps friend stayed awake, or they'd be sleeping on the floor. But she and my 15-year-old daughter, Anna, fought all the time. when I was coaching tennis, I'd come home. I did not want to come home. I live out bipolar. I'd drive and I'd just be thinking, shit, there's going to be another fight. They were like siblings. But then I found out after my wife died last year that Anna and Isis had actually become friends too, confidants. And Anna shared everything she told me with Isis. I never knew that. I thought all they ever did was fought for my attention. And Isis also shared everything about me to my 15-year-old daughter. So hopefully you can start understanding the complexity and the confusion and the difficulty that can bring into a family. Isis didn't consider herself married to me, but she sure was a crazy soul. She brought a vibrancy, an unfettered spirit of just sometimes insanity but fun to our household. From literally going out to bars and dancing on the bars, to going to concerts, Aerosmith, Queen, Billy Joel, getting drunk. At this point, people ask, how many are there? Okay? How many altars did you live with? Change it. These are the main altars I lived with. These are not all of them, okay? But these are the ones that were present for much of my life. As you can see, they each had their own penmanship. They wrote a poem before she died. That said, to those I love. And these altars that I lived with all signed it. You can see sometimes in them the emotion. Joanna took so much of the rape. Just big flurry letters whenever she wrote. Most of the time, her word of choice was fuck, okay? In her poems, in her writing, Ginny, as I said, here was deaf. Cassie was the one that went to high school, was good at performing and singing and playing piano, had the lead role in a couple high school plays. Laura went to college, tested at 54 IQ. Christy took the fear. She was just this timid young girl. Jimmy, as I said, was the only male that was in my wife's system that we knew of. He was a protector. He learned martial arts. Ella was a 2-year-old. That was the absolute sweetest human being in life. And Amy, I lived with half of the time. So half the time mostly with my wife, half the time with Amy. The others would come and go as they pleased. Amy and Ella were adopted by our neighbors. They called them Ima and Abba, Hebrew, because there was an altar in her that spoke only Hebrew. And came out once at a dentist's office, and she thought she was back in the cult being tortured. They would pull out her teeth when they were baby teeth. They'd literally just pull them out. And that was obviously traumatic, and she thought at the dentist's office that she was there, and she started speaking Hebrew. Fortunately, I lived in Israel for a year, studied Hebrew myself, so I spoke some Hebrew and could interpret and understand, and the dentist sat there for an hour and a half waiting till we calmed her down enough to finish her teeth. But Amy was loved by everybody. Anyone who got to know Amy fell in love with this little girl. She loved to hug people. When we'd go to the doctor, all the nurses knew Amy, and they knew that when she was leaving, that she would wait to get her hugs from the staff, from the people at the front that check you in, from the nurses, from our doctor, Dr. Hedgerness, and she changed people's lives, literally. I want to draw something here that might help you understand how this worked just a little bit. So I said, inside their mind, okay, the mind of a multiple, is a different world. But it is a world just as real as you and I sitting here today, where you all have names and you all look different and you all have your own personalities. In her case, they had their own eyesight, some had epilepsy, they had their different blood pressures, some didn't have epilepsy. Their voice tone, everyone was different and unique. And they lived in what we call kind of, the bad one there. Their hotel. Inside the hotel in the very middle was a living room. And several of the altars diagram this out, but I'm going to make it very simplistic. And then there were their rooms, all around this living room, okay? And the most prominent altars or persons lived in these close rooms. So you had Amy, and you had Deborah, and you had Isis, okay? And then ones that were less prominent, that maybe I only got to know them for a week or two. There was one altar angel who was paralyzed. And for about 2 weeks, I carried her physically around the house. Carried her to the bathroom, processed her memories, dealt with it, and never saw Angel again. And they had rooms that were more on the outer ring. And from this living room, there was a door. And there was, in some books, most common, you'll hear that person that controls the door, the gatekeeper. Well, Amy, being 3 years old, she named the one at the door, the one at the door. Okay? And so that was the name of this person here that let people in and out, that determined who needed to be out, and for whatever different reason, maybe for the torture and the stuff that happened to her. I met him a few times. Him, her, it was not a sexual person. It was asexual, with absolutely zero emotion, tone. I never met someone like this in my life. It was very eerie, where the whole body just had nothing there. And you just talk, I can't even talk like him. No inflection at all. So he controlled some of that. And then the people who were the closest had more access. It's just like if you go over to this door right now, okay, so Garrett, you're right here, and Ellie, you're over there in the corner, you could get out this door faster, right? And that's the concept right here. Now, from the living room, there was a place that Amy called the observatory, okay? And from there, that anybody that was close enough could watch, literally the eye. And they could watch what was going on the outside and be aware of, let's say, Isis is out, but Amy and Deborah are watching. Like you're watching out that window what's going on, okay? That is the concept called co-consciousness, okay? So these altars here, they were watching, and it's a choice for some of them whether or not they want to watch what's going on. And they didn't always want it to. They had their own room with their own kind of life in there. Now, my wife, being the host, okay, when she wasn't in the body, in control of it, she got put in a room close by, but different in that she didn't know where she was. She had no idea what was going on. She didn't know she was a multiple. Okay, for all of her life, these things were popping in and out. She'd wake up in Green Bay. Literally. She'd wake up in Madison. How the hell did I get here? She'd wake up with different clothes. It might be this Patty, whom you haven't met, who was totally slutty, dressed in slutty clothes, wore makeup like you wouldn't believe, because she gave sex, not because she wanted to. And people thought, boy, you're a terrible person. She gave sex because that protected Elisheva. Because Patty knew, if I don't, worse things are going to happen. When Patty was out and I was working with her understanding this, I'll never forget the time she broke down and realized, I don't have to have sex. And just wept. And Patty disappeared. Patty integrated is what is called, and that is became part of the host, never more to appear. Okay? And so I hope you can learn something there. I won't even go into the ramifications of a person like her who was sexually promiscuous, but not because she was sexually promiscuous. She was a girl willing to sacrifice to save other people. Understand also that a person who is a multiple doesn't go around announcing, I'm a multiple. The whole system that the mind creates is to protect that person. And to protect them, most things have to become secret. They know if they reveal it, consequences can be dire. And the cult that my wife was raised in would tell her, you ever tell anyone, this is what will happen. And she witnessed, and the altars witnessed firsthand the kind of stuff that this cult could do. It was real. But yet at times, there were moments where some of these memories bled through. Think of holding this water right now in a semi-permeable fabric. For a while it holds it, but if too much water gets in, some of it bleeds through, right? And that's what happens to a person who's a multiple. So then my wife starts getting little glimpses of things, little pieces of maybe a rape, but not how could I be raped? I would have a remembrance of it, right? Or of something physically that they did to her. And when these little pieces, one, it was very confusing, but sometimes when more got put together, she would tell people. She went to teachers. She went to guidance counselor. She went to the police. She went to family friends that knew her adoptive mom and dad. A dad who was a principal of a school and a mom who was a teacher, who had a very good reputation in the community. And what do you think these people did? Well, certainly they believed her, right? Certainly they said, we got to stop this, right? Anyone? You know what they did. They did nothing. They didn't believe it. They didn't want to believe that something this terrible could be happening. A person right there in their own school by people that they knew. And sometimes the memories of an altar, that the trauma can be so severe that one person can't hold all of that memory. It's just too terrible. I'll give you one example. Being raped by many men on a cold stone table. And after that, being put in a wood box, naked, covered in snakes, worms, bugs, you name it. Having the top pounded on it with one hose to breathe out of, and then buried. And then to never know whether you'd live, whether they're ever going to take me out of this. Think that'd be traumatic? That's one little thing that they did to her. No wonder they had to share this. I experienced some of this with my wife in 1996. The cult, I'll just say, accessed my wife. We had to get the police involved, had to get our doctor involved, detectives involved. And for some reason, some of the alters at that point felt comfortable to reveal themselves to the two detectives in Antigo that had the case. They found it fascinating, you know, first time someone meets a multiple, meets the different people, hears the different voices, you know, sees some of the things, their mannerisms different, they can get very involved. But then when everything didn't just fit together in a neat little package with a bow on top, and different alters shared different pieces of that experience, and some of the past memories gets blended into the present, what just happened to her. It's confusing. I don't blame the cops completely. Somewhat, yeah. This is one case where you'd say this was not where they should have been the primary source investigating this. A trained psychologist or psychiatrist was needed to understand this. And the cops, they couldn't figure it out, so they dismissed it. You know, they just said, nah. Actually, the craziest thing they said was, we've determined that you guys did this to grow your church. Oh my God. You guys all want to come to my church hearing that I got a cult on my ass, right? All right, you all just are begging to come to my church, because boy, that sounds a lot of fun, and people had their jobs threatened that were in our church, just a lot of stuff like that. So that just grows a church. Okay, so that was crazy. What I do know, though, is that I lost my wife for 3 months. I lost her to Deborah. It was the first time Deborah came out. And Deborah wouldn't sleep with me. We weren't married. Okay? We had a bed right alongside our bed, and for that time, Deborah slept on the floor. Took me about 3 months to find a hospital that specialized in multiples, in what is called satanic ritual abuse. People who, it's cultic, it's the worst kind of abuse imaginable, involved in so many things, slave, or the sex, slave market and all of that kind of stuff. But I found this hospital in Dallas, and our friends pitched together the money because insurance doesn't cover it, very expensive. Flew down there, and I spent 5 weeks there. I got a little hotel with my wife, accepted in this hospital just for multiples. There my wife met people who had gone through satanic ritual abuse. There she met, and the altars met other altars. They had a great program to help them understand how they can live like this, how they don't have to necessarily integrate where they lose who they are, but they can work as a community. Amy was deathly afraid of integrating. Okay? You know what it meant to her? What it meant to most of them? What do you think? Anybody have an idea? What would it mean to integrate where you no longer exist? Death. That's exactly it. And she goes, church guy, I don't want to die. But then they learned they could live as a community, and they could work together as a community and make decisions as a community. But this idea of co-consciousness, what happens is when these memories, say, come back to the host, my wife Elisheva, she gets them all back. The pain that they felt now becomes her pain. The memories of all that trauma becomes hers. She used to say to me, this co-consciousness is shit. Because it hurts so much, and they have to relive, and they physically, again, feel that pain. I want to share one other example. We put number 3 on. How much time do we have?
We get out at 34, so 9 minutes.
Okay. You might ask, is there any proof, Dave? It was 1997. It was the middle of the Halloween season. Halloween for the cult lasts from October 13th to November 4th. They virtually took my wife most of that time. Her parents, principal, covered records, we've got proof of this stuff. But very hurt. And it was a Friday night, and this was back when internet was dial-up, ding, all that stuff. And she found camaraderie online, meeting other people. And she comes out of the bedroom, it's about 8 o'clock, and she goes, Dave, you gotta take me to the hospital. I'm like, oh no. One more trip to the hospital. We've been to the hospital hundreds and hundreds of times. Doctors all know us. Some doctors don't like us, some of all this stuff. She goes, you gotta take me, I know right now. She goes, I know that there's something in my left hand here. And I'm thinking, oh no. So she showed, there's a little scar there. We get into the hospital about 9 o'clock, and I'm thinking, is this just gonna be another thing that they don't have any proof, right? They do an x-ray. And in her left hand right here is a pin. Inserted right there at the base of the knuckle. Okay? Right there. There it is. So we call our doctor. I don't know if any of you knew Dr. Hegerness. He was my my wife's doctor for 32 years, I think. And he said, come on in, Saturday morning. He left what he was doing, came into the hospital under what's called a fluoroscope, did the surgery to remove that It came out relatively easy, half-hour process. And we're all happy, we're going home. She goes, oh my God, Dave, look at, she's like, I can move my hand and it's not hurting. She loved to play piano. She loved to cross stitch, things like that. And she goes, oh shit. And we look, and there's a little scar there. I call up Dr. Hagmanus right away and I go, Gary, you know there's one on the right hand too. He goes, I'm already home. Come in Monday. And right Monday morning we come in, he set aside all his patients for 2 hours. Go into the hospital, do the surgery. This one was 3/4 inches long. And if you see, it grew into the bone. That one there was tough for him to get out. Okay. And that there was the thing that changed my doctor's understanding of a multiple. He didn't believe it before this. That there and then the blood pressures were the two things that changed this highly educated man from not believing that this kind of abuse takes place to this does. So we still have these, and I saved the x-rays just to show what these people do. Why did they do it? They believed, actually, there's this thing, this teaching, that they can attach a demon. Doesn't matter that you don't believe it, okay, I don't either, but what matters is they believed it, to this under some ritual that they would do. And they also knew it would be painful. Figured it got put in when she was around 12 to 13, and it had been there for 30 some years. Always hurting her hand. Elisheva, Isis, Amy, Ella, Joanna, Twilight, Deborah, Jimmy, Laura, Ginny, Melanie, Megan, Christy, Carla, they went through hell. And they found a way to survive. And in doing so, they taught those of us around them that had the privilege of knowing her how to enjoy life in spite of what we may encounter. I say together we danced. I used to love dancing, then I got into this fundamental form of Christianity and quit. She got me back into dancing and enjoying life in spite of all she went through. I was at the YMCA recently, swimming, and in the lane next to me was an elderly man, and he was splashing and really struggling to get through the water. And before I jumped in, I watched him, I thought, gosh, he's not a very good swimmer. And as I was swimming, with my goggles on, I turned, and I noticed his right leg didn't work. It just hung in the water. And I was thinking as I was swimming, what an illustration. I saw the surface of this man, and anyone else seeing it would think, he's not a good swimmer. But you go underneath and there was a whole other story. His right leg didn't work. And he was doing the best he could on the top, in spite of the fact that his right leg didn't work. My wife had a surface appearance. People saw her as weak. They saw her as mentally ill. They saw her as drug seeking. They saw her as a woman of little faith. I've had the privilege and opportunity to travel around this world, to speak and teach in different parts. I've met tens of thousands of people. My wife, hands down, was the strongest person I ever met in my life, ever. She taught me more about life and not complaining than I deserve to know. So if I can leave you with one thing, it's try to be open to people. Don't just look on the surface and say, oh, they're shitty or that. They're. Try to understand there might be something going on underneath. And if someone comes to you and says, I've been abused, my stepdad, my father, my uncle, a friend, a neighbor, people, first believe, listen, you might have been that person that could have helped my wife. And even just believing can help a person, but help them for that abuse to stop, okay? So that, I hope,
makes sense to all of you. I have a poem that Lishava and Alters wrote that explains a little bit about being a multiple. We'll hand them out on your way out. Anybody have any questions? Anything? Go ahead, Seth.
What was it that Amy called you?
Church guy,
And why'd she call you that?
because I'm a church guy. I'm a pastor.
Oh.
Yeah. They had other names. Some call me Dave. David is Hebrew for David. Some call me David. Some had some other names they would call me at times. Okay. Go ahead.
So when you did see another altar come out, did you like physically see them coming out, or was it just instantaneous?
It was, okay, in the case of before I ever knew them, then I would feel their presence. I would see my wife change. Once I got to know them and they came out, I would know instantly. Boom, I'd hear the voice change. Before my wife died, there was an altar that had just started to come out. She hated me. Her name was Athena. Only person she connected with was my daughter. She pulled a gun on me, put it right to my face, and said she was going to kill me. She was a very, very hard person. Stuff I called it to her was unimaginable. And she saw me more as an enemy. But I think she was, like I said, all of them, they protected their body. Thank you all.